Where do I even start with Baldur's Gate 3? I mean, that's a very cliche old phrase, but seriously this time, there are as many angles to tackle this game from as there are options for you to solve problems in the game itself, and trust me, there are a lot of different ways to solve problems in this game. I suppose we could start from the very basic, it always works, right? Baldur's Gate 3 takes place in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting of the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop game. And I don't play tabletop because I have no friends, so no idea what that means, but it's basically a medieval magical setting with elves, shadow gods, and living beings that die when you solve their riddles, so you know, the good stuff. Naturally, you get abducted by aliens before the game has even properly begun, and they put a bug in your head that will also turn you into an alien. You'd rather that not happen, so you join a band of misfits and journey across the land to cure the bug brain thing and help and or murder anyone you come across along the way. Combat is turn-based and ridiculously complex, with you being able to move, use an action and a bonus action per turn, with each character having their own individual turn. However, some actions can end up spending both a bonus action and a full action in order to trigger, and you can manipulate the number of actions you get with certain skills. Most notably, strength focus classes usually unlock a second attack that you can do per turn. However, it is a second attack, so you can only use attack skills and you don't get additional movement, so you better be next to your target so you can make good use of... Look. Usually I try to break down a game's systems when I'm criticizing that game, so people who never heard about the game have a frame of reference for what I'm talking about. In this game though, this is basically impossible. Breaking down the game systems of Baldur's Gate could be an entire hour-long video that would serve as basically a tutorial for the game, since there's honestly a lot of stuff that it does not explain, and even then, people would still comment that I missed something. There's just so much to see and learn in this game. I mean, just one look at the UI will tell you that you have more options than there are buttons in a plane's dashboard, so that alone should be enough to prove that we would be here all day if we started talking about every single possible option. All you really need to know is that you can cast spells, AoE attacks, status effects, and all of the RPG stuff that you know and love. Though this game has a very high level of interactivity between them. For example, if somebody sets a fire next to one of your characters, you can cast a rain of ice daggers to put it out so you can safely pass. Just watch out, because the floor is now slippery because of the melted ice water that's everywhere. Yes, the game is that ridiculously detailed. Now, the game isn't perfect, for me at least, so allow me to list a bunch of negatives that I didn't like, because that always goes so well with highly rated new releases, right? I really dislike how the spell casting limit system is done. Basically, you can cast a limited number of spells divided by level. Stronger spells have higher levels, and of course you always have more casts of lower levels than higher levels, but what really ticks me off is that in order to restore them, you need to rest by going back to your camp and sleep. Now, that's not always true. Some classes can restore their spells by using a short rest that is used instantaneously, but you only get 2 short rests anyway until you're back to the camp again. And normally this would be used to emphasize dungeon crawling resource management, but you can just long rest in 99% of places anyway. So all this means in practice is that you're going to have to pass through a loading screen every 3 or so battles to restore your team to full capacity. And I did not enjoy that process. This problem is slowly solved, partially at least, however, as you play through the game, since you begin with almost no spell slots at all, but you end with many more spell slots, as well as many more spells, of course. And this is my second problem with the game, and it is how weak you are at the start of it. I died a lot at the start from enemies that could do bullshit like multi-attacks per turn, and while eventually you turn into the bullshitter, it takes a little while before you're running over them like a truck. Which, from the deep research of 10 minutes on Google, it seems to be a particular problem with the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons that this game tries to adapt in the first place, which is apparently why many players prefer to begin at a higher level in the tabletop, because the earlier levels just suck so badly. In this case, I can't blame the developers from faithfully following the source material, but this does cause the difficulty level to be a bit all over the place instead of the usual incremental ramp that you expect. I also dislike how dice-based everything is, which is a stupid opinion. The stupidest opinion in this video by far, but give me a second to allow me to explain myself. Every time you do an attack on this game, on the background, the game rolls a dice to see if you hit. If you miss, nothing happens, but if you hit, then it rolls another dice to see how much damage you actually did, meaning you have to roll twice on every single attack to actually do some damage. My heart sank with how many battles early on were a string of constant misses from both me and my enemy, only for one attack to finally land and then do 1 damage. Most games that I play usually have a simple system of miss, hit, or critical hit, and you can expect to do a certain level of damage every time you hit. So having the possibility of randomly dealing 1 damage because of a bad dice roll is a brand new level of pain for me. Once again, this is mitigated later on, as both your numbers go higher and the skills start rolling multiple dice per skill. Or so I think. I don't actually have a deep knowledge of the game systems, especially with all of the rolls happening on the background. I just noticed that I hit much harder late game and this was much less of a problem. And finally, a surprising number of battles that you have to fight are honestly just boring. At the beginning of the game, you mostly deal with small numbers of enemies, but as the game progresses, it starts loving to throw you into battles with 10 other enemies when your maximum party number is 4. And in order to balance things, this means that a lot of those enemies actually can't deal a lot of damage. In fact, they might sometimes just as well not exist, but they do, and they have their own individual turns and actions and bonus actions like everybody else that you have to sit and watch. And as the game goes on, more and more filler enemies appear, and the more complex the arenas get with crazy area of effect attacks, and since the game renders gigantic chunks of the world at the same time and the maps keep getting more and more complex, it becomes common for the AI to freeze for a few seconds at the beginning of every enemy character turn in order to figure out what is going on. And honestly, at that point, I just started browsing my phone or getting a cup of coffee while the AI did its thing because it just became mind-numbingly boring. I do have to give the developers a huge thumbs up though for allowing multiple AIs to take the same turn together if all they're going to do is move. It is a very neat thing and a very efficient way to speed up the AI turns. Of course, we could go over the bugs, but most of them happen to me on Act 3 and are too spoilery and specific, so I don't really want to talk about them. And also, honestly, I don't mind bugs that much. My save was not corrupted, some very big things happened, but I felt like they just made my playthrough more interesting, and this game has simply too many moving parts, and I'd rather accept some of them aren't going to work perfectly the first time around than discouraging developers from trying to do great things. So, with all of that out of the way, you might think that I hated the game, that I came out of it with mixed feelings at the very least, and that this is a call-out video to everybody who loved it about how the game they like is simply not that good. But, honestly, no. I actually love this game, and trust me, I am as surprised about that as you are. Of course, in a year with Hi-Fi Rush and Bomb Rush Cyberpunk on it, I can't say honestly that this is my personal favorite game of the year, but quite honestly, in spite of the problems I had with it, sometimes because of them, as they were mere byproducts of other decisions that made the game better. I honestly think Baldur's Gate 3 might be the best RPG I've played since Fallout New Vegas. And New Vegas is currently 13 years old. Since New Vegas got mentioned, I guess I don't have to bury the lead any further. The title of this video is mainly about how many dialogue options you have in Baldur's Gate 3, because I love story-heavy games, I love choosing options, and I'm tired of seeing the pathetic number of dialogue options in recent games like Cyberpunk 2077. Oh, but the poor developers can't account for every possible option that the player could think of, you could say, theoretical viewer. And that is true, but choice, like most of gaming, is about illusion. There are lots of different choices, that you can make to disguise the illusion of choice and to manage the options that are available to the player at any given time, while still making it feel like they had a choice in the story. And for a decade, I had to keep pointing at New Vegas repeatedly because that was the craziest, ballsiest game that most of the time seemed to just say screw it and simply give you 10 different options with 7 different skill checks because it could. Now, it would be stupid of me to not point out that there were other games in the meantime that had great and varied dialogue options like the absolutely fantastic Disco Elysium, but that game is a lot more focused in scope and I think it deserves its own video someday. So when I talk about dialogue options and player choice here, I want to make it clear that I'm talking about it in the sense of broader RPGs that try to allow you to create a character from scratch and try to take that into account as you roleplay in the world that the developers created. And I'm glad to see that the art of making choices in that context has not been lost, because Baldur's Gate 3 went really hard on it, arguably harder than New Vegas. The level of consequences for your choices here is amazing. You can experience racism if you play a certain races, or you can also experience kinship as you meet others of your race. Unique dialogues depending on your class, there are tons of different options to convince people, including intimidation, persuasion, or deception, which gives you tons of different ways to solve problems using only dialogue, while giving you the tools necessary for you to truly roleplay your character and how they would deal with that situation. One of the highlights of my playthrough was when I accidentally walked into Bloodborne and convinced a crazy surgeon to let himself get killed due to my knowledge of religion. Which, trust me, it makes a ton of sense in context. If you want the freedom to build a character and have them and their mostly loyal band of dumbasses make a bunch of choices that feel actually meaningful, even if in the end the adventure will still hit the most important beats, well, Baldur's Gate 3 might just be the best game ever to do that in. According to my admittedly small knowledge of the genre, I'm more of a JRPG guy, to be honest. There's a CRPG book coming out, right? Maybe I should pick that up. Now, not all of the options in the world could have saved the game if it had bad writing, but thankfully, the writing is great and mostly on point. There are a few characters that I'm iffy about, Gale, but they work well together and make for an interesting bunch to adventure with, each having their own little backstories and emotional baggage that they have to carry with throughout the adventure, and I really like how committed the writing is to its setting. When a devil comes to offer you ideal, he does so by quoting fictional books and talking like he's out of a Shakespeare play. And then there's just the hours of optional animal dialogue, because yes, there's dialogue for every single friendly animal in this game, if you have the correct spell. And that's how you know you got the good shit. None of that wink wink quip quip stuff, just writers fully committed to the setting. And all of this is backed up by amazing face capture performances. That's right, this game that has hundreds of thousands of lines and variations based on player choice still took the time to motion capture every single line. And the amount of effort the actors put into every single piece of their voice acting really shows. Just take a look at the hundreds of Asterion clips and you will instantly see the reason why people like him so much. Besides blatant horniness, that is.
Of course! What fun! I'm going to fucking kill you.
Now, as much as I would love to go through every single party member, in the interest of time and keeping things interesting, I'm only going to say Karlach is best girl and Will is best boy, and no, I won't elaborate. Moving on. I already said that the gameplay is very complex, but just saying that doesn't really do it justice. Instead, let me give you an example. Early in the game, you can encounter some dying hyenas that are giving birth to monsters. It's a cursed god thing. I don't know exactly how it works. But what happens is that there are already monsters nearby and one of the hyenas will run away and call them unless you stop it from doing that. But, well, since I was early in the game and like I said, early game characters suck shit, I failed and got stomped by a boatload of monsters. So I reloaded my save, and on my second try I decided to explore some more and level up before the battle, but accidentally went around the place and found the monsters that the hyena caught the first time. I took them by surprise and killed them, so now the hyenas had no reinforcements. When that happened, my mind blew wide open and I realized what Baldur's Gate 3 open world really is. It is essentially a maquette of a fully realized world, where every enemy, every NPC, every obstacle didn't only exist, but everything around it that allows it to operate exists as well. Like an immersive zen on ultra steroids, where breaking the sequence of events is not only possible almost every single time, but also encouraged on almost every single instance. The fact that all of these interlocking systems and enemy encounters are crafted by hand, one by one, each trying to offer you a unique battle, is simply insane. And that's also why me saying that the fighting got boring when too many enemies got into the mix is a bit of complicated, because it might be the game's fault, but also it might just be my fault for not noticing interesting ways that I could use to solve that problem. I fought 3 giant ogres in an abandoned village and I just beat them normally. Then later, as I was writing this, I found a video of a player who transformed into an owlbear. He fell from the rooftop and almost killed them with his own fall damage, then got a wizard to levitate him back up so he could jump again and finish the kill. And not in a million years I would have thought of that, especially since I didn't have a shape-shifting druid in my party at the time. And that's really what Baldur's Gate 3 is all about. It is a tabletop story generator. It says a lot that the possibilities feel so endless, non-players can have a lot of trouble even figuring out if any of the stories they are being told are bullshit. One of my favorite moments was fighting with a swamp witch. She had a hostage in a cage above a bottomless pit and she set it on fire, but luckily I had a scroll of ice daggers, so I shot the daggers at the cage was damaged, but thankfully not broken, and the fire was put out. So the witch disguised herself as the hostage and teleported around the arena with the hostage. It would normally be impossible to figure out who was who, but an attack that I hit her with earlier had left the true witch with a status effect, so I was able to easily identify her. This encounter can only be described as absolutely crazy and is quite possibly the most fun I ever had with game mechanics like these in an RPG. Unfortunately, I did not capture footage from it, but what I did get was footage from when I had to kill a strong general type enemy surrounded by his loyal followers. And what I did was, I snuck inside their armory, I shoved half a dozen barrels of gunpowder in my pockets and spread them across the arena, then lit them up. Simple, efficient, almost killed me, but it got the job done. Also, when a necromancer was going to summon a billion skeletons for me to fight, I just turned my strongest fighter invisible and pushed him into a bottomless abyss. You would be surprised how many bosses you can just shove into a bottomless abyss, though you do lose their loot as a trade-off. It is also a game about frustrating stories. I do have a story, but it has a lot of details, so let's see if I can get this out correctly. Once I proceeded to Act 2, I thought everything in Act 1 was unavailable, and I left a giant robot fight that was too hard for me behind. Then I sold a mold that I was supposed to use to craft a super strong weapon in the forge that the robot was protecting because I thought I wouldn't need that mold anymore. Then everybody in the place I sold the mold at died. After that I figured out that I could in fact go back to the forge, but with the character I sold the mold to dead, I thought that was lost forever, so I might as well go on. Except that the character I sold the mold to in fact did not die, and they showed up later in Act 3 where the forge really is unavailable. And this must be a prank. Some divine force played on me as punishment for skipping side content, it just must be. Even that though, as you can see, can act as a funny story and as proof of how responsive the game world is about your actions. I don't think the developers were insane enough to calculate every single possible course of action, but they have put enough tools and enough interactions between them to create an insane amount of variation that really makes each playthrough feel like an individual story, even while hitting the same major beats. It is a giant playground for your imagination. Like I said, I don't play tabletop RPGs, but I imagine with my limited insight that this is the closest we managed to get so far to it, and I don't think it will be easy to surpass it, unless AI really takes off in a crazy way or something. This just might be about the human limit of what an RPG is capable of, and in that sense, Baldur's Gate 3 is an absolute triumph of game making. Here are my final thoughts on this game. If you love tactical gameplay where you can spend hours finding new creative ways to solve the same problem, you are absolutely going to love Baldur's Gate 3. If you don't, but you still want to experience a game where your choices can lead to a surprising amount of variety and actual consequences, then I think it's still worth checking out. Just be warned that even on Explorer difficulty, the easiest mode, the game still requires you to use your brain, and you will get your shit kicked in early on until you figure things out. But even so, it's pretty cool when you do put those two brain cells together and wreck a boss in a single turn. Or, just shove them off a cliff. Just become invisible, skip encounters, and shove the boss off a cliff. That works too. But that's it for my review of Baldur's Gate 3. Once again, thanks for listening to my incoherent rambling about dialogue options to the very end, and I hope to count on your support in the very near future.